Commander Vexstar stepped into the massive tribunal chamber, her forearms shaking uncontrollably. The wound where her fifth arm used to be still throbbed with phantom pain. Around her, representatives from every corner of the galaxy sat in stunned silence. Word had already spread about what happened to the 7th Pacification Fleet, but nobody knew the full truth. The chamber itself was a marvel of galactic engineering. Crystalline walls stretched up toward a dome that showed the swirling colors of hyperspace beyond. Floating translation devices hummed quietly, converting her words into thousands of different languages. But today, all of that advanced technology felt primitive compared to what she had witnessed humans accomplish with nothing but determination and scrap metal. Honored council members, Vexstar began, her vocal cords struggling to form the words. The silence was so complete that even the air recyclers seemed to hold their breath. I am Commander Vexstar, formerly of the 7th Pacification Fleet. I say formerly because that fleet no longer exists. She paused, watching as several council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The hegemony had always been unstoppable. For 1,000 years, they had swept across the galaxy like a cosmic storm, absorbing or destroying every species they encountered. The idea that a single primitive world could stop them was impossible to accept. 3 cycles ago, our deep space. Scouts detected a small blue-green world orbiting a yellow star. Initial scans showed primitive technology, divided governments, and constant warfare among themselves. By every standard we had developed over centuries of conquest, they should have been easy prey. Vexstar activated a holographic display, showing Earth as it appeared from space. The beautiful blue marble slowly rotated, showing continents dotted with lights that marked human cities. To the untrained eye, it looked peaceful, almost defenseless. Our intelligence division spent months studying their communications, we learned. Their languages mapped their military installations and cataloged their weapons. Everything we discovered confirmed our initial assessment. They fought with chemical explosives and metal projectiles. Their fastest ships could barely reach their own moon. Their governments couldn't agree on anything, constantly bickering and competing with each other. She gestured toward the hologram, and it zoomed in to show human military bases. Look at these installations. Simple concrete structures, primitive. Radar arrays, weapons that would have been obsolete in our arsenal 10,000 years ago. Our tactical computers calculated a 99.7% probability of total victory within 7 solar cycles. The tribunal's recording systems captured every word, every gesture, every subtle change in her biorhythms. This testimony would be studied by military academies across the galaxy for generations to come, assuming any of them survived what was coming. But there was something our computers couldn't calculate, Vexstar continued, her voice growing stronger. Something our 1,000 years of conquest had never prepared us for. The humans had a quality that our databases couldn't quantify, our algorithms couldn't predict. She paused, looking directly at the High Arbitrator, a being so ancient that his species had been traveling between stars. When most others were still crawling out of their primordial oceans, they had hope. The word hung in the air like a physical thing: hope. Such a simple concept, yet it had proven more powerful than plasma cannons or quantum torpedoes. When we began monitoring their communications during the initial assault, I heard names that meant nothing to us then. Hyen-Su, a young human commanding their lunar defense stations. Minho, coordinating mining operations in the asteroid belt. Yunji, organizing civilian evacuations on their homeworld. Just names in our intelligence reports. Vexstar's compound eyes seemed to look through the chamber walls, seeing events that had happened light years away. We dismissed them as irrelevant. Individual humans couldn't possibly matter in the face of our superior technology and numbers. We were wrong. Admiral Kexmorth, commanding our fleet, was so confident that he allowed our communications specialists to monitor human transmissions as entertainment. We listened to their desperate attempts to coordinate a defense, their pathetic calls for help from colonies that had no way to reach them in time. She activated another display, showing the massive hegemony fleet as it approached Earth's solar system. Hundreds of ships, each one capable of sterilizing a continent, moved in perfect formation through the void. But as we listened to their communications, something changed. Instead of the panic and despair we expected, we heard something else. Determination. Humans across their entire star. System began working together in ways our analysts said were impossible. Jun Ho, a mining engineer on a remote asteroid, volunteered. To modify his industrial equipment into weapons, Taemin, a research scientist on their moon, began converting his laboratory into a fortress. Saw Young, a cargo pilot, started evacuating civilians while simultaneously planning combat missions. Vexstar's voice grew quieter, more reflective. We had studied hundreds of species during our expansion. Most surrendered when faced with overwhelming force. Others fought briefly before accepting the inevitable. But the humans, they started getting more organized as the threat increased. Their scattered military forces began coordinating perfectly. Their civilian populations started manufacturing weapons in factories that had been producing consumer goods hours before. Children too young to fight began serving as communications operators, coordinating defenses with the precision of trained military personnel. She gestured to her missing arm, the stump covered by a simple medical wrap. This is what remained. After my first direct encounter with human warfare, and that was just the beginning of our education. The tribunal chamber remained silent, but Vexstar could sense the shift in the room's atmosphere. Fear was beginning to replace skepticism. These beings had ruled the galaxy for centuries, but now they were starting to understand that something had changed. Something fundamental about the balance of power in the universe. The humans didn't just fight us, she concluded. They taught us what it truly means to face a species that would rather die than surrender. And in doing so, they showed us something we had never seen before in our 1,000-year expansion. She paused, meeting the eyes of each tribunal member. They showed us what it looks like when prey becomes predator. The holographic display flickered to life, showing Ceres spinning slowly in the darkness of space. The asteroid looked harmless enough, just a rocky chunk of metal and ice with a few scattered structures on its surface. But Vexstar's hands trembled as she watched the recording of their approach. Admiral Kexmorth was in his command chair. Sipping his favorite drink and reviewing casualty reports from previous conquests, she began, her voice carrying the weight of terrible memories. He had personally overseen the destruction of 47 worlds. To him, Ceres was just another routine stop. The hologram zoomed in, showing the massive hegemony fleet approaching. 300 warships, each one bristling with weapons that could crack a planet's crust. The flagship alone was 15 kilometers long, its hull gleaming with the advanced alloys that had made the hegemony unstoppable for centuries. Our tactical computers were already calculating the best angles for orbital bombardment. Vexstar continued. Standard procedure was simple. Demand surrender, wait exactly 60 seconds for a response, and begin systematic destruction of all defensive positions. She paused, watching as the tribunal members leaned forward. Even they, rulers of a galaxy-spanning empire, seemed fascinated by what came next. The mining station's communication array was primitive, barely more advanced than the radio signals. Their species had been using for centuries. When Admiral Kexmorth opened the channel, he expected to hear crying, begging, maybe desperate offers of tribute. The recording showed the human outpost in detail now. Prefabricated buildings connected by pressurized tunnels. Mining equipment scattered across the asteroid's surface. Few small ships docked at a simple landing platform. By any reasonable standard, it was defenseless. The Admiral's translator rendered his words into the local human language, Vexstar. Said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. He gave them the standard ultimatum: surrender unconditionally, submit to processing, and their deaths would be swift. Resist, and we would make their final hours last for days. She activated another section of the hologram, showing the interior of the mining station's command center. A human female sat at a console, her hands steady despite the massive fleet hanging in space above her home. This was Dalnim, though. They didn't know her name yet. 60 seconds passed. Then 90. Our weapons officers were requesting permission to begin bombardment when the response finally came. Vexter's voice took on a tone of grudging respect. 3 words. Just 3 words that changed everything. The recording played Dalnim's voice, clear and defiant across the void. Come and take it. Admiral Kexmorth actually laughed. Vexstar continued. He ordered the first wave of attack ships to disable their defenses and capture the station intact. He wanted to use it as an example for the rest of the human colonies. The hologram showed sleek hegemony fighters peeling away from the main fleet, their plasma cannons charging as they approached the asteroid. But what happened next made several tribunal members gasp in shock. The humans had spent 3 hours preparing while we approached, Vexstar explained. 3 hours turning their mining operation into the most effective defensive system I've ever encountered. Suddenly, the asteroid erupted in light and fury. Mining charges that had been used to break apart rock became guided missiles, launched. From improvised tubes welded to the station's hull, industrial lasers designed to cut through metal became precision weapons, slicing through fighter hulls like paper. Our pilots were trained to fight other warships, Vexstar said, her voice full of admiration and horror. They weren't prepared for weapons that came from mining equipment. The humans had turned every piece of machinery into something deadly. The recording showed hegemony fighters exploding as they encountered the unexpected defenses. But it was what happened next that truly demonstrated human ingenuity. Jinwoo was 19 years old, Vexstar continued, just a kid working in the mines to pay for his education. When our fighters broke through their outer defenses, he volunteered for what they called a special mission. The hologram showed a small mining drone, barely 3 meters long, modified with external fuel tanks and packed with every explosive the humans could find. At the controls sat a young human male, his face calm despite the chaos around him. He flew that drone through our fighter screen like it was a racing ship, Vexstar said, her voice full of wonder. Our pilots tried to intercept him, but he knew that asteroid field better than anyone. He used the rocks as cover, bouncing his signal off communication relays to avoid our jammers. The recording showed the tiny drone weaving between massive warships, too small for their main guns to target effectively. The human pilot's skill was extraordinary. He flew like the void itself was his home. Our flagship's point defense systems locked onto him when he made his final approach, Vexstar continued. Admiral Kexmorth ordered all batteries to fire. The space around that drone lit up like a star, but Jinwoo didn't stop. Through skill, luck, and sheer determination, he guided his improvised missile through the defensive fire. The recording showed the moment of impact, a tiny flash against the massive hull of the hegemony flagship. The explosion wasn't large, Vexstar said quietly, but Jinwoo had aimed for exactly the right spot. The drone penetrated our engine core and detonated the fuel reserves. Our most powerful ship went from being a symbol of galactic domination to a drifting wreck in seconds. The hologram showed the aftermath. The flagship listed helplessly, its engines dark, its weapons offline. Around it, the human mining station continued its desperate defense, turning every piece of equipment into a weapon. The battle lasted 18 hours, Vexstar continued. 18 hours of watching humans turn their home into a fortress. Ujin, their chief engineer, rewired the entire power grid to overload their mining lasers. Haijin, barely 16 years old, coordinated missile strikes using nothing but a handheld computer and incredible mathematics. She paused, looking at each tribunal member in turn. When it ended, we had lost 47 ships, 47 warships, destroyed by a mining station that shouldn't have been able to fight back at all. But it wasn't just the ships we lost, Vexstar added, her voice heavy with meaning. It was our confidence, our certainty that we were the apex predators of the galaxy.
No.
The humans had shown us something we'd never seen before. The recording showed the final moments of the battle. The human mining station, battered but still functional, surrounded by the wreckage of hegemony vessels. Dalnum's voice came over the communication channel one last time, offering to accept the surrender of any surviving alien crews. That day, we learned that humans don't just fight to win, Vexstar concluded. They fight to make victory so costly that their enemies would rather face extinction than fight them again. And they had only just begun to show us what they were truly capable of. The tribunal chamber fell silent as the hologram faded, leaving only the memory of tiny human mining station that had humbled the galaxy's greatest military force. The holographic display shimmered and reformed, showing Earth's moon hanging in the darkness like a pale sentinel. From space, Luna looked peaceful, a collection of domed cities and mining facilities scattered across its gray surface. But appearances, as Vexstar had learned, meant nothing when dealing with humans. Command was furious after Ceres, she began, her voice carrying the weight of painful memories. Losing nearly 50 ships to a mining station had shaken their confidence. They needed a victory, something to prove that the hegemony was still unstoppable. The hologram zoomed in, showing the lunar colonies in detail. Armstrong City, the largest settlement, sprawled across the Sea of Tranquility. Smaller outposts dotted the landscape, research stations, mining operations, and communication arrays that kept the moon connected to Earth. General Vochthel devised what he called the Lunar Gambit, Vexstar continued. Instead of attacking Earth directly, we would capture their moon and use it as a forward base. From Luna, we could bombard their homeworld at our leisure, forcing them to surrender without destroying the planet's resources. She paused, watching as the tribunal members studied the display. Luna's strategic value was obvious. Whoever controlled it could dominate the entire Earth-Moon system.
Oh.
The plan was brilliant in its simplicity, Vexstar said. 100,000 troops, the cream of our invasion forces, would land on Luna and secure the colonies within 72 hours. Then our engineers would begin converting the human facilities into weapon platforms. The hologram showed the massive hegemony fleet taking position around the moon. Troop transports hung in space like metal clouds, their holds packed with soldiers eager to redeem their reputation after the humiliation at Ceres. We began with orbital bombardment, Vexstar continued, her voice growing quieter. Standard procedure. Destroy their defenses, crater their landing fields, and force them to take shelter in their underground facilities. Then we would dig them out at our leisure. The recording showed plasma bolts raining down on Luna's surface. Human installations exploded in brilliant flashes, their domed cities cracking open like eggs. Smoke and debris filled the thin atmosphere. As the bombardment continued for hours, but something was wrong, Vexter said, her compound eyes reflecting the horror of those memories. Our intelligence reports said the humans would evacuate their civilians to Earth. Instead, every transport that left Luna was heading toward Earth, but they were empty. The humans were sending their ships away, not their people. She gestured toward the display, which now showed the aftermath of the bombardment. Where once there had been gleaming cities, now only rubble remained. But deep beneath the surface, something was stirring. Taman was his name, Vexstar said with something approaching reverence. A research scientist who had been studying lunar geology for 15 years. He knew every tunnel, every cave, every weak point in the moon's crust. Yet he had spent months preparing for our arrival. The hologram shifted to show cross-sections. Of Luna's interior, what had once been simple mining tunnels had been transformed into something far more complex. A network of fortified positions, supply depots, and communication hubs stretched beneath the moon's surface like a vast underground city. While we were celebrating the destruction of their surface installations, Vexstar continued, the humans were waiting below. It turned Luna into the most sophisticated fortress in the solar system. The recording showed the first landing wave, thousands of hegemony dropships descending through the smoke and debris. The troops inside were confident, eager to prove themselves against the humans who had humiliated their fleet at Ceres. I was in the third wave, Vexter said, her voice barely above a whisper. Elite shock troops, the best soldiers in the galaxy. We had fought on 100 worlds, conquered species that had held their ground for centuries. We thought Luna would be a simple mop-up operation. The hologram showed her unit's dropship touching down near the ruins of Armstrong City. 50 soldiers in advanced combat armor, armed with weapons that could punch through starship holes. They moved with the confidence of veterans who had never known defeat. The surface was quiet, Vexstar recalled. Too quiet, our sensors showed. No human activity, no defensive positions, no signs of resistance. We began to think the bombardment had been more effective than expected. But as the recording showed, that quiet was deceptive. Hidden beneath the rubble, human defenders waited with patience that bordered on supernatural. They had learned to think like their enemies, to understand their tactics, and use them against them. The first ambush came from above, Vexstar continued. Human snipers had positioned themselves in the wreckage of their own buildings, using the debris as camouflage. Minjae, their best marksman, took out our squad leader with a single shot from nearly a kilometer away. The hologram showed the chaos that followed. Hegemony soldiers scrambling for cover as human fighters emerged from positions that should have been destroyed by the bombardment. But these weren't ordinary defensive positions, they were traps, carefully designed to channel the invaders into kill zones. But it was when we reached the tunnel entrances that we truly understood what we were facing, Vexter said, her voice full of grudging admiration. The humans had spent months preparing. Every corridor was a death trap, every room a potential tomb. The recording showed hegemony troops advancing through lunar tunnels that had been transformed into something from a nightmare. Explosive charges hidden in the walls, improvised weapons that turned the tunnel system into a maze of death. My unit of 50 soldiers was reduced to 3 within the first hour, Vexstar continued. The humans used tactics we had never encountered. They would attack our flanks, then retreat, drawing us deeper into their fortress. Every step forward cost us soldiers. She paused, her eyes distant as she relived those terrible hours. But it was their wounded that truly broke our spirits. Junho was an engineer who had lost both legs in our initial bombardment. Instead of seeking medical attention, he rigged himself with explosives and crawled into our supply depot. The hologram showed the explosion that followed, a blast that destroyed weeks of carefully stockpiled supplies and equipment. But more than that, it showed the human willingness to sacrifice everything for their cause. The siege lasted 3 months, Vexstar concluded, her voice heavy with the weight of those memories. 3 months of fighting an enemy that refused to surrender, refused to retreat, refused to accept defeat. When we finally withdrew, we left behind 80,000 dead. The humans had lost 8,000. She looked directly at the tribunal members. But those 8,000 had fought with such ferocity that our survivors were more afraid of humans than death itself. They had shown us that sometimes the greatest victory is making your enemy pay such a price that they never want to fight you again. The hologram faded, leaving only the memory of Luna, a moon that had become humanity's greatest fortress, and the hegemony's greatest defeat. The holographic display flickered and transformed, showing the cold void of space 6 months after the Luna siege. But this time the scene was different. Instead of massive hegemony fleets dominating the battlefield, sleek human vessels moved through the darkness like predators stalking their prey. Everything changed after Luna, Vexstar began, her voice carrying a mixture of fear and respect. We thought we had won because we forced the humans underground. We were wrong. Those 3 months gave them something far more valuable than a military victory. They gave them time to learn.
Ow.
The hologram zoomed in on a human shipyard hidden in the asteroid belt. What had once been a simple mining operation had been transformed into a sophisticated military production facility. Dozens of ships were under construction, but these weren't the crude vessels the humans had used before. The first sign of change came when our supply convoys started disappearing, Vexstar continued. Not destroyed, simply gone. Distress. Signals, no wreckage, no survivors. It was as if they had vanished into the void itself. She activated another section of the display, showing a hegemony supply fleet moving through space. Massive cargo vessels surrounded by escort fighters, carrying the weapons and supplies needed to maintain their occupation forces. Everything looked normal until the attack began. Sungmin was 23 years old, a cargo pilot who had never seen combat before the war, Vexter said, her voice full of admiration. But by the time he led his first strike, he'd become something our tactical computers couldn't classify. A hybrid of pilot, engineer, and tactical genius. The recording showed what happened next. Human fighters appeared from behind asteroids, and disabled ships, moving with precision that defied belief. But these weren't the same crude vessels the humans had used before. These ships were sleek, fast, and deadly. They had taken our own weapons and made them better, Vexstar continued, her voice filled with wonder. Our plasma cannons, designed by our finest engineers over centuries of development, had been improved by humans using nothing but salvaged parts and determination. The hologram showed the human fighters in action. Our plasma weapons fired faster, hit harder, and used less power than the hegemony originals. But more impressive was how they used them with creativity and tactical awareness that seemed almost supernatural. But it wasn't just their technology that had evolved, Vexstar said, her voice growing quieter. Their entire way of thinking had changed. They'd studied us, learned our patterns, and turned our own strengths against us. The display shifted to show human command centers deep within asteroid bases. Banks of computers analyzed every piece of data captured from hegemony. Forces, battle recordings, tactical manuals, even personal communications, everything was being studied and cataloged. Jin was their strategic mastermind, Vexstar continued. A mathematics professor who had never worn a uniform before the war, but she had something our generals lacked, the ability to think like her enemies, while remaining completely unpredictable. The recording showed Hajin's command center, a cramped space filled with screens and data feeds. But from this humble location, she was orchestrating a campaign that would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. She had analyzed every battle we had fought for the past 1,000 years, Vexstar said, her voice full of grudging respect. Every tactical formation, every strategic decision, every weakness we had ever shown. She knew us better than we knew ourselves. The hologram shifted to show the approach to Proxima Station, a critical hegemony supply depot that controlled shipping lanes throughout the sector. 200 of their finest warships surrounded the facility, confident that their superior numbers would guarantee victory. Admiral Zekmorth commanded our defense fleet, Vexstar continued. A veteran of 40 campaigns, he had never lost a battle. When our sensors detected 50 human ships approaching, he actually laughed. The odds were 4-1 in our favor. But as the recording showed, the humans weren't planning a conventional battle. Instead of charging directly at the station, they began a complex series of maneuvers that seemed random at first glance. Jin had studied our battle formations for months, Vexstar explained. She knew that when facing superior numbers, we would deploy in a specific pattern, one that had proven successful against dozens of species. But she also knew the weakness in that formation. The human fleet split into smaller groups, each one moving in a different direction. The hegemony commander ordered his ships to respond according to standard tactical doctrine, spreading his forces to cover all possible attack vectors. That's when we realized we had been outsmarted, Vexter said, her voice barely above a whisper. The humans weren't trying to attack the station. They were trying to separate our fleet, to break our formations, and force us to fight on their terms. The recording showed what happened next. As the hegemony ships spread out to cover the station's perimeter, the human vessels suddenly converged on a single point. But instead of attacking, they began broadcasting a signal that interfered with hegemony communications. In 30 seconds, they had cut our fleet in half, Vexstar continued. Ships that had been coordinating perfectly suddenly couldn't communicate with each other. Our tactical advantage disappeared in an instant. But the humans weren't finished. As the hegemony fleet struggled to re-establish communications, the human vessels began attacking with a precision that seemed impossible. They struck at exactly the right moments, targeting the most vulnerable. Ships first. Jinsu commanded one of their attack squadrons, Vexstar said, her voice full of respect. A former test pilot who had learned to fly by racing through asteroid fields. He led his ships through our formations like they were dancing, striking, and retreating before we could respond. The battle became a masterclass in tactical warfare. The humans used every trick they had learned, every weakness they had discovered, to systematically destroy the hegemony fleet. Ships that had seemed invincible were picked apart by smaller, more agile human vessels. But it was their unpredictability that truly defeated us, Vexstar continued. Every time we thought we understood their tactics, they would do something completely different. When we expected them to retreat, they would attack. When we prepared for a frontal assault, they would disappear and strike from behind. The recording showed the final moments of the battle. Once mighty hegemony fleet was reduced to burning wreckage, while the human vessels regrouped around Proxima Station. They had achieved the impossible, a complete victory against overwhelming odds. 12 ships, Vexstar said, her voice heavy with defeat. That's all that remained of our fleet. 12 ships out of 200, limping back to report our failure to High Command. She paused, looking directly at the tribunal members. But the humans had lost 20 vessels, and they acted like it was a tragedy, mourned their dead, honored their sacrifice, and used their grief as fuel for the next battle. That's when we realized we weren't just fighting a war, Vexstar concluded. We were fighting for our survival against a species that had learned to turn every defeat into a lesson, every loss into motivation for victory. The hologram faded, leaving only the memory of humanity's first great victory and the hegemony's first taste of true fear. The holographic display expanded to show the entire Sol system, from the distant ice of Pluto to the burning surface of Mercury. But this wasn't the primitive solar system the hegemony had first encountered. Every planet, every moon, every asteroid had been transformed into part of humanity's defensive network. High Command was desperate, Vexstar began, her voice carrying the weight of finality. After Proxima Station, panic had spread through our empire. Worlds that had been loyal for centuries began questioning our authority. We needed a victory that would restore our reputation, or the entire hegemony would collapse. The display showed the massive fleet gathering at the edge of human space. 500 warships, the last remnants of the galaxy's most powerful military force. Every vessel was a masterpiece of destruction, armed with weapons that could shatter moons and commanded by officers who had conquered 1,000 worlds. Emperor Vexstal himself issued the order, Vexstar continued. The final cleansing. We would destroy Earth completely, even if it meant sacrificing every ship in our fleet. The humans had humiliated us too many times. Now they would pay the ultimate price. But as the recording showed, the humans were ready. Their defensive preparations had turned the Sol system into the most sophisticated fortress in galactic history. What had once been a simple planetary system was now a weapon of unimaginable power. Admiral Wu Jin commanded their fleet, Vexstar said, her voice filled with respect. A former cargo pilot who had learned strategy by studying our own battles. He had prepared something that defied every principle of space warfare we had ever known. The hologram zoomed in on the approaching human fleet. 200 ships, smaller than the hegemony vessels, but moving with perfect coordination. But these weren't just warships. They were the cutting edge of human engineering. Incorporating technology captured from a dozen battles, the battle began. At the edge of their solar system, Vexstar continued, expected the humans to make their stand near Earth, using their homeworld's defenses to support their fleet. Instead, they met us in the void between stars. The recording showed the two fleets approaching each other across millions of kilometers of empty space. The hegemony formation was magnificent, row upon row of massive warships advancing like an unstoppable tide. But the human fleet moved differently, like a living organism responding to some unspoken command. That's when we realized the humans had turned their entire solar system into a weapon, Vexstar said, her voice filled with wonder. Asteroids that had been hollowed out and fitted with engines became guided missiles. Space stations that had once been research facilities became mobile fortresses. The hologram showed the moment when the human trap was sprung. Asteroids that had seemed like harmless rocks suddenly ignited their engines, accelerating toward the hegemony fleet with devastating speed. Each one was packed with explosives and guided by human pilots who had volunteered for suicide missions. Ming-Jae piloted the first asteroid strike, Vexstar continued. A mining engineer who had spent years working in the belt. He guided a kilometer-wide chunk of rock directly into our flagship's hull. The explosion was visible from Earth. But the asteroid strikes were just the beginning. As the hegemony fleet tried to respond, human civilian ships began emerging from hiding places throughout the system. Cargo vessels, passenger liners, even small private craft, all of them had been converted into weapons. They had militarized everything, Vexstar said, her voice filled with amazement. Every ship, every station, every piece of space, infrastructure, had been turned into part of their defense network. We weren't just fighting their military, we were fighting their entire civilization. The battle raged for 3 days. The hegemony fleet, despite its superior numbers, found itself outmaneuvered and outgunned at every turn. Human commanders like Yun Su and Dal Ho led their forces with tactical brilliance that seemed almost supernatural. But it was when we attempted to board their command ship that we encountered the true horror of human warfare, Star said, her voice dropping to a whisper. So Young and her Marines were waiting for us. The recording showed the interior of the human command vessel. Instead of the simple corridors the hegemony expected, they found a maze of defensive positions. Every bulkhead could become a weapon, every room a trap. Soyoung was a former police officer from Earth, Vexstar continued. She had never fought in space before the war began. But she had learned to think like a predator, to use every advantage the environment provided. The hologram showed the boarding action in detail. Hegemony shock troops, the elite of their military, were systematically destroyed by human defenders who fought with a combination of technology and pure determination. Soyoung's Marines didn't just fight, they hunted. They had studied our tactics, our equipment, our weaknesses, Vexter said. Every corridor was designed to channel us into kill zones. Every defensive position was placed to maximize our casualties while minimizing their own. The battle in the corridors was unlike anything in galactic military history. Human Marines used gravity manipulation, atmospheric controls, and structural engineering to turn their own ship into a weapon. They fought with tools, improvised weapons, and strategies that seemed to come from pure imagination. When the battle ended, Vexstar continued, only my ship remained. 500 of the galaxy's most powerful warships had been reduced to drifting wreckage. The humans had lost 60 vessels, but they had achieved total victory. The hologram showed the aftermath. The human fleet regrouping around Earth, their homeworld safe behind defenses that had proven unbreakable. But instead of celebrating, they were already planning for the next threat. Admiral Wu Jin contacted us personally, Vexstar said, her voice filled with respect. He offered to accept our surrender, to provide medical aid to our wounded, and to allow us to return home. But his message was clear. This was humanity's final warning. The recording showed Wu Jin's transmission. A middle-aged human with tired eyes and a voice that carried the weight of absolute authority. His words were simple, but they carried the power of an entire species behind them. The humans could have destroyed us, Vexstar continued. They had the power, the technology, and the tactical advantage. Instead, they chose to let us live. Out of mercy, but so we could carry a message back to the galaxy. She paused, looking directly at each tribunal member. That message was simple. Leave humanity alone or face extinction. Not surrender, not defeat, extinction. The humans had shown us what happens when a species fights with the understanding that their survival depends on making their enemies regret ever challenging them. Today, human names are spoken with reverence across the galaxy, Vexstar concluded. Hyantsu, Minho, Yunji, Dalnim, Jinwoo, Taemin, Junho, Sunmin, Haijin, Woojin, and Soyoung. These are not just names of warriors, they're reminders that somewhere in the galaxy exists a species that views death as preferable to surrender. The hologram faded, leaving only the image of Earth, hanging in space, beautiful, blue, and now recognized as the most dangerous world in the galaxy. We came to their world as conquerors, Vexstar said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute truth. We left as witnesses to the most terrifying force in the galaxy, human determination. My recommendation to this tribunal is simple. Establish a permanent quarantine around the Sol system, not to contain the humans, but to protect the rest of the galaxy from accidentally provoking them again. The tribunal chamber fell silent as Vexstar's testimony ended. In the distance, monitoring stations reported that human exploration ships had been detected at the edge of known space. Their intentions unknown, but their capabilities now legendary. The age of human expansion had begun. The galaxy would never be the same. The end.